Welcome to Houston Sports Talk with your host, Robert Land.
Thanks for checking into the best Houston sports podcast, part of the Bleav network. Check out Bleav in Astros with Mike Stanton and Bleav in Texans with Cecil Shorts. Joining me is my co-host, Stephen Kerr, 65 plus years in sports journalism between the two of us. And later in the show, we beg you not to panic about a certain Texan. We're going to get to that in a second. Is Altuve making a pitch for Bregman? And the Rockets lost another key piece from one of their most unforgettable teams. But first, Stephen, happy anniversary to us. Our first episode was 11 years ago tomorrow.
Yes, Robert. Man, that's amazing. And I know I wasn't a part of the show when you started it then, but, I think I started listening. I think I've mentioned this before. I want to say it was in like 2014, somewhere around there. So it wasn't too long after the show started. But, man, what an amazing run. And just the literally hundreds of guests you've had on. Some of them, you didn't know who they were then, but you sure know who they are now. So congratulations, my friend. A job well done.
300 plus guests, over 1,500 episodes. The episode number, I always mention this, which you'll see on the podcast number, is different because I used to not label the interviews. Right, so it's over 1,500 episodes now. And we are the longest running Houston sports podcast that's seen weekly or watched weekly, I guess you would call it.
Or even listened weekly. I mean, yeah, absolutely we are.
I even asked ChatGPT, Stephen, I said, what's the best Houston sports podcast? And guess who showed up first when they answered me on ChatGPT? That was nice.
They actually got it right. I didn't have the same luck when I put in search results for my name when I was in radio. I thought maybe they'd know I was in radio. And they said something like, we don't know anybody by that name. So Houston Sports Talk is doing a lot better on ChatGPT than my name does, Robert.
I'm going to flash up as everybody watches, and we usually have this up there at the bottom of the screen, but you might not pay attention to it. But we talk about going to check out our Houston Sports History playlist on YouTube. Over 200 conversations, interviews with, players and legendary players at that, coaches, et cetera, media. Go check it out. I mean, it's some really good stuff if you're a fan of the history at all. If you want to hear about the history, about some of those guys and some of the histories, and there is not that historical. I mean, it's as recently as guys like George Springer, who we've interviewed, and former Astros from this dynasty run.
Yeah, I mean, it's history because it has been made. And, in some cases, the Astros are still continuing to try to make history. So, yeah, just a lot of great stuff. Be sure and check out that playlist. In all those playlists.
All right, let's get to the Texans because, man, there's a lot going on in Houston sports and a lot going on with the Texans. And one of the narratives is what I'd call minor panic over Tank Dell's stats. Just 4 catches, 37 yards. And I don't mean that's his average. That's it for 2 games. Yeah. And, Stephen, it felt inevitable 1 or 2 receivers would get left out with all this talent. But I do want to squash one narrative. I see some saying the Texans need to get Tank more involved. I mean, look, he had 4 targets against the Bears and 3 rushing attempts. That's 7 opportunities. If he makes the catch that he dropped 30 yards down the field with, by the way, some open space in front of him, I don't think this is a conversation.
No, I don't, Robert. And I really think that's what it is the Texans just have more weapons. And the fact that they are trying to use Tank Dell, in a handoff situation, it's obviously an attempt to get him more involved. Now, it may not be something he's used to, but I think when it's all said and done, all of the Texans' top receivers are going to get their time. Stephon Diggs had a pretty quiet week. He got some catches, but it wasn't anything like week 1. So I think you're just going to see that in subsequent weeks, unless, heaven forbid, we start seeing injuries and the depth starts getting tested. Then you're going to see some more catches from, top 2 or 3. But it's nice to have weapons to be able to spread things around. I think it's an advantage not only for C.J. Stroud, but it's an advantage for Bobby Slowick in what plays to call. So I'm really not too concerned about it at the moment, unless there are signs that are pointing to something else regarding Tank Dell that we don't know about.
It's worth noting Tank is lining up more on the outside with Diggs in the slot. I'm not sure that's helping the cause. His size makes him harder to find outside the hashes and along the sidelines. And I'm seeing Stroud miss him on a couple of those throws. We'll see if Slowick changes it up this week, Stephen.
Yeah, I'm a little curious as to why that is. I mean, I know there's a reason, but I was curious about that myself, of why he's on the outside more.
Another thing that we got to talk about is this incredible stat that I pulled up. Which NFL team Stephen, leads the league in tackling efficiency. And where do the Texans rank? Any ideas?
I would say they're in the top 3 because I think that's one of the things they've done particularly well, at least to a point. So where are they in the rank?
Yeah, this is a trick question because I asked you 2 questions, and really the answer is the one question figures it all out. Next Gen Stats says the Texans are first in the NFL. They're not second, third, fourth, fifth. They're first. 6.4% miss rate on the tackles. And I mean, what a turnaround, Stephen, from 2 years ago with Lovie Smith. Actually, I heard Caserio saying they have these particular teaching techniques to improve tackling without getting clobbered in practices. They teach tracking angles.
Well, whatever it takes, Robert, because, what a difference a couple of years ago makes. I think you started to see some improvement last year, but that's been a really big help. The Texans defense has had some lapses, but that's not one of them, is when you learn to tackle well, I think in the long run, everything else starts falling into place. So, it doesn't surprise me. I figured that'd at least be 1 or 2.
All right, another question for you. Which NFL team has the best chance of making the playoffs after 2 games so far this year? You think the Texans are in the top 3?
Oh, they absolutely have to be. They have to be. They're 2-0, and the rest of the division is 0-2. I would say they're the number 1 team right now.
We're number 1. We're number 1. It's not the coolest thing in the world, but after 2 games.
As long as it's at the end of the season when the Super Bowl's over, Robert, that's when we can chant. But at least right now, they are number 1.
The Vikings, by the way, I should say the Texans have a 77% chance of making the playoffs. The Vikings, 5th best odds. So somebody's odds are going to go down this week. But Stephen, sure is fun to lead the league and good stuff for a change.
Well, it's fun, especially when Vegas and a lot of the national media, they're favoring the Texans. I know it kind of makes us nervous, but, they were favored against the Bears. And the last I looked, they are still favored against the Vikings, I do believe.
Here's some more fun with numbers. And you're right. 2.5. I think 2.5.
That was the last one I saw was 2.5.
More fun with numbers. We know the Texans defensive line looked amazing Sunday. And if you look at Next Gen Stats leaders in pressures, Danielle Hunter, 2nd in the NFL, Will Anderson, 3rd. Absolutely 0 complaints on the defensive side. But Stephen, maybe my biggest red flag early on is this highly paid O-line. And I know we're all excited about their run blocking in week 1, but the Colts, boy, they look just as awful against the Packers. So you might have to throw that one out in the trash.
Yeah.
And the pass blocking hasn't looked good either week, but the overall Pro Football Focus grades really caught my eye. Even if you don't like PFF grades, their system shows guys like Tunsil and Shaq Mason considerably down from what they've done in the past. And Stephen, we don't talk about Shaq Mason, but listen to his PFF grades year by year, starting with 2021, 4 years ago until this year. It goes from 85.2 to 68.9 to 66.6. And this year it's 55.8.
Well, I'm not the greatest mathematician, Robert, but even I know that is not progression, that's regression. And we had concerns about Shaq Mason last year. I think we talked about it some. And, with Laramie Tunsil, I don't know how much of it is that, he's coming off that injury. He didn't have any training camp to speak of to get ready. And it's obvious that the problems with the false starts for him hasn't gotten any better. So that is something troubling. And it's, the Texans are going to be playing some much tougher competition this week and in the weeks to come. So that's something that's got to get better. And they've definitely got to protect CJ Stroud better. The last thing we need is for him to get, just really whopped on one play and out he goes. That's all it takes.
The refs need to maybe give Tunsil a break when there's 2 guys that jump at the same time. Don't just blame Laramie Tunsil like they have been doing a couple of times.
Well, there is that. But, it's that reputation that follows you, I guess.
Yeah, that's for sure. And just make a note on Shaq Mason. I noticed this when I started looking up on Spotrac what his contract situation was. They can release him before next year, and there's hardly any cap hit. So this could be, if this kind of production continues, it could be his last year, even if he doesn't improve. I'm thinking it could be his last year.
Yeah, it very well could be. I mean, you've got to start doing better as the season goes on. And, with something so important, especially with all the problems the offensive line has had the last few years with injuries and inconsistent play, you really need to shore up that spot and all the other spots to make sure that it's running smoothly. And Shaq Mason, at least right now, is not helping with that.
Now, on the other end of the spectrum, the highest graded Texans O-lineman is Juice Scruggs. And we got good news. He was back at practice Thursday, but while Juice is highly graded or the highest graded, Kenyon Green, the worst PFF grade at 51.2. That's not good, by the way, guys. It's not good at all. And I'd say, who cares if I thought my eyes were seeing something different, but I don't think my eyes are seeing differently. Steven, the pass blocking is my biggest worry for Kenyon. Not sure there's any improvement that I've seen since his rookie year in that.
Yeah, unfortunately, you're right. And the run blocking for the Texans the first couple of weeks has been solid, but the pass blocking's got to get better. So when you've got two guys that aren't pulling their weight in that department, that's when it gets dangerous. So Kenyon Green, I mean, I know we've given him a little bit of a pass, and he looked pretty decent in week one, but from an overall standpoint, he certainly has to get better, which will help the Texans and the pass protection.
Yeah, there was that whole bit about, oh, look at Kenyon Green. He looks differently. He looks in better shape. He looks like an offensive lineman that's not overweight.
Well, you still got to protect the quarterback.
Yeah, so. And you can't. In other words, just don't get fooled. We do this all the time. Do not get fooled by the guy losing weight, gaining weight, changing body shape. A lot of times it just doesn't matter.
Well, how many times do we hear that in every sport? I mean, we heard it in baseball. We heard it in football. We've heard it in basketball too, is, oh, this guy's bulked up a little bit. Oh, this guy's, maybe dropped some weight and added a little more muscle. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, but it doesn't necessarily translate into results once you get not only into training camp, but you start playing games.
Well, some bad news this week was the loss of tight end Brevin Jordan. He goes on IR with a knee injury. Nothing's more annoying, Steven, to me than these injuries that you were not even aware of until the middle of the week. It's like, when did that happen? Did he trip on a video cable going back to the locker room after the game? What's the deal?
Are they taking a page out of the Astros book, throwing these surprise injuries at us in front? Because, I was racking my brain. I'm like, well, I watched the game, and I just don't remember anything severe happening. So, yeah, that is a mystery, and it's certainly a loss. And, Robert, I hold my breath every week, especially, with positions like C.J. Stroud and the tight end position, which, has had some ups and downs the last couple of years with injuries and things like that. You just, at this time, you hold your breath every week hoping, that injuries are going to happen. I mean, let's just be honest, they're going to. But for certain guys or certain positions, you can't afford to have that happen. So it's just bad news about Brevin Jordan all the way around.
It definitely sucks for him because he looked so good the last few games last year and had a great offseason. D'Amico showered him with praise during camp. His blocking's been outstanding. His versatility to line up in the backfield's been huge. Luckily, Cade Stover can do a lot of that. Steven, that's why you just can't have too much depth in the NFL.
It's just like baseball. You can't have too much pitching. So in football, whatever position, that you can get the most depth at, by golly, go for it. And, you'd like it at all positions. So we'll just have to see how that plays out from here on out.
Everybody fell in love with Cam Akers in the preseason. This might be the old be careful what you wish for, because Mixon and Pierce appeared doubtful as you and I speak Thursday afternoon. Last we saw of Akers, he was fumbling inside the 5-yard line.
Yeah, that is a concern. I mean, I just and Mixon, if he doesn't play, that is really going to hurt, Robert, because even in game 2 with the Bears, he hadn't gotten a lot of things going, but he could have. I mean, he was starting to kind of get rolling, and it's just one of those real freak things. Again, you hold your breath every week, and there were already so many questions with the Texans' run game after Mixon. So now you got him and Dameon Pierce. I mean, I know we've talked about Dameon Pierce hasn't been effective, but, especially with Mixon being out, we need people like him in there, but even he's probably not going to play. So it's going to get really thin now at the running position.
Anything that you're focusing on with this Vikings game? I mean, really, we've talked about some of the areas that I want to see and what's going to happen with offensive line, Tank Dell, et cetera, et cetera. But the one thing I haven't had to talk much about, we talked about the good stuff with the tackling, is the defense. And, that seems to have been fantastic. I mean, this is going to be more of a test because it's Sam Darnold. We're not dealing with basically a rookie and Caleb Williams and what is pretty much a rookie in Anthony Richardson the last couple of weeks.
Right. And Darnold is only on a 1-year deal. So this is a prove-it year for him. And at least through the first couple of games, especially against the 49ers, he's been showing you something. So this is definitely going to be the biggest test the Texans have had so far. I know we've talked a lot about the defensive line and how well it's played. They're certainly going to have to be on their game there. But the secondary, we've had questions about it. It's looked a little better. We had a key interception. And then Kamari Lassiter had one that got called back, but he finally got one later. Those are the plays they're going to have to make to keep the Texans not only in this game, but give them a chance to win. But, yeah, with Sam Darnold out there, at least for the first 2 games, he's looked better than the Sam Darnold than we've seen the last few years.
No big plays for Justin Jefferson, who looks to be healthy coming into this one.
That's going to be, you definitely got to keep an eye on him. They have a couple of great running backs that they're going to have to watch. So, yeah, they're going to be tested. The defense is definitely going to be tested this week.
Quick reminder, look for our live Texans post-game shows right after every game. Of course, Tom Chevery and I break it down. In case you missed it, check out yesterday's show. I went behind enemy lines with Bleav and Vikings host Mike Wobschall in a really fun preview. You can support us by giving us a thumbs up, commenting, and subscribing for free on YouTube or your favorite podcast app. All right, Stephen, can you tell Jose Altuve to keep his shirt off? You want to keep your shirt off, but you want to keep your socks on, because that's what the baseball world has told us at this point is like, okay, this is the clothing that's okay to come off, and this is the one that has to stay on, right?
I actually thought that was pretty funny, Robert. I have to admit. Yeah, I mean, you and I have watched baseball for decades. And I was talking to a friend of mine about this the other night, and he said the same thing. He said, I've been watching baseball for 50 years, and I've never seen anything like when Jose takes his cleat and his sock off to show that he'd been hit in the foot by a ball. I mean, it didn't turn out well for him or the Astros, obviously, but I can't help but laugh about the whole situation, Robert. I just hope that nobody got too close to his feet, especially, if he's been in that shoe all evening. God only knows what his foot smelled like. So, yeah, Jose, just keep the shoe and the sock on if you don't mind.
You think he smelled his foot and he could smell it, and that's why he got thrown out of the game?
It could be. You know how these umpires, they'll throw you out for just about anything. So it might have been the odor rather than what he said. Yeah.
Is that in the rule book that you have to keep your shoe and sock on after the third out? Because it's basically the third. Like, Altuve is going back to the dugout at that point. So yeah.
I don't know. We'd have to look it up. And no, I just think it was, as like I said, it didn't turn out well, but you had to have a good laugh over the whole thing because it was just something you never saw. And he was just trying to prove a point. That's all.
After watching that complete travesty behind home plate during the Padres series, it's just hard for me to believe we're not a bunch of steps closer to changing some rules. I have no idea, Stephen, why a foul ball off a foot can't be challenged. Why not? And balls and strikes should be a thing by next year. Even Espada was saying as much.
Yeah, that's right, Robert. And I just feel like if you're going to be selective about what you replay, how can you be? I mean, you don't want to add more challenges and slow down the game, but you really need to make just about everything up for grabs as far as challenging goes. In the minor leagues, I mean, they're testing out the balls and strikes, robotic thing. And I think where you can even challenge at least once a game, a strike or a ball call. So, yeah, I mean, if you're going to do it, let's do it all the way. Let's do it right, because there's always going to be a situation that comes up where, well, we can't review it, so you're going to get screwed. But as Jose Altuve did, of course, he went to great extremes to show them they got hit in the foot. So, yeah, I just don't get me started on the umpires, though, Robert, because I've always had a sour taste in my mouth with them and how much they get away with almost on a daily basis. Yeah,
and if you missed it, Espada basically referenced the fact that he wants to see the AAA rules, and I forget how many challenges you get. But, I mean, it doesn't you worry about slowing down the game because they've done all this stuff to speed it up. But, I mean, we see this in like a second, whether they're right or wrong. We know what's happened immediately.
You do, and I don't think you need to increase the number of challenges. I mean, you still need to use them wisely. I mean, that's the thing. You may get gypped at one point, but if you don't use your challenges correctly, then when it really matters, you're not going to have one. But what I do think is you just need to open it up and let just about everything be challenged. I mean, I can't think of every situation. There may be one or two that you say, yeah, probably shouldn't challenge that, but I can't think of what that is.
Let's get back to Jose Altuve, because some news just before we started recording. We rarely get a good quote from Jose Altuve. Right. So this quote from a Chandler Rome piece got my attention when he was asked about Alex Bregman. Altuve said, quote, "I don't see any chance of him leaving. That might just be me. I really think our front office people are going to get a deal done. I'm sure that not only are we a better team with him, but we are a better organization. We really need to make it happen," unquote.
Well, I love Jose Altuve, and I mean, there's so many reasons, and that is exactly what he should say and what he should feel. Of course, he doesn't want Bregman to leave, because that's another part of the infield that those two have been a part of for so long. I love his confidence, Robert, but I'm just not sure. Although, I think the chance that we do have is, Scott Boras he hasn't been the agent that he was a few years ago and getting all these mega deals. I mean, there's still some that are getting him, the Matt Chapman deal and things like that. But more and more, you're starting to see some of his clients not quite get the deals they have. Unless you have a banner year, where Bregman is up for MVP, which he's not, I guess there is a chance that something could be worked out, that maybe he won't get quite the money that he's hoping he will. But if that's the case, that's probably going to be something that's not going to happen until later in the offseason, because he's going to turn down the qualifying offer the Astros are going to give him. And of course, they're going to give him one. So I like his confidence, but I'm still on the 80-20 side, really, that Alex is not going to be back next year.
It's just interesting because you didn't hear Altuve go to bat for Springer or Correa or Garrett Cole or some of the other guys that they've lost in the last few years.
No, you didn't. But I mean, of course, I would think that he would have for Correa, just because of the fact that, again, they've been together. They've worked so well together in the infield, and so do he and Bregman. I don't know. I think a lot of it also just has to do with the market, maybe the way the market was at the time. But it is interesting. That's a good point that he didn't say it about those guys. But I think at some point, he's just trying to be confident. And, watching all these guys walk away, and then he himself was, loyal to the team and signed another long-term extension. So maybe just some things have shifted in the last few years, and he just feels the need to say something. But I would love it, Jose. Believe me, I'm cheering for it. But I just still have my doubts quite a bit.
It'll be interesting to see what Dana Brown can get done. And listen to these numbers that Dana Brown picked up at zero cost. Zero cost. Jason Hayward, 714 OPS. Ben Gamel, who we might have seen the last of this season with his injury, but still 739 OPS when he came to the Astros. Hector Neris, 0.66 whip. Welcome back, Hector. Brian King, 1.01 whip. Taylor Scott, despite recent struggles, still a 1.17 whip. That's incredible. Caleb Ort, despite the Padres disaster, still has a 0.76 whip. I mean, Steven, this is stuff at the margins that I loved about James Click, and he doesn't even give up anything. And I haven't even mentioned Kikuchi in that whole conversation.
Well, of course, they did give up quite a bit with the trade of that, but you're right. And, we talk a lot about the trades and, drafting, but a lot of the scouting too takes place later in the season, when teams start waiving players or, things of that nature. And, it's like certain players can get picked up at least for the stretch run of the season, and they can get hot. They can step in. They can either help you to the playoffs or, when you get in the playoffs, they can actually help you during the postseason. This is where Dana Brown is really going to earn his dollars. I mean, he's got quite a reputation as far as being the draft wizard, and, and we can talk about trades, but a lot of these pickups, all those you just mentioned, some of them occurred earlier in the season, and then some of them more currently, like Ben Gamel and Jason Hayward and, some of those guys. So it is remarkable when you think about it, Robert, especially with all the injuries the Astros have had to deal with. And then now you get Ben Gamel, who, my gosh, the guy was playing so well. Mets gave up on him. He came to the Astros, and all he did was hit. And then he has that injury that's probably going to put him out the rest of the year. But still, with all the injuries the Astros have had, it is really difficult to patch things together like that the way Dana Brown has.
You have to be impressed that, last year I felt like the stuff at the margins weren't quite as good, but he's really done it this year and didn't have to fill as many holes last year, of course, with the health of the team. But still,
yeah, I was going to say a lot of it too, it has to be the situation that you're in, and you don't have quite as many chances to either strike gold or strike out.
Not sure I showed near enough love for Framber Valdez, so let me just take a second and remind everybody he's fourth in ERA among starting pitchers in Major League Baseball, not the American League, not the Astros, Major League Baseball, fourth. By the way, Ronel Blanco is fifth, so right behind him. But Framber, Steven, he's got a .82 whip his last 11 games. Thank goodness for that.
Oh, can you imagine where the Astros would be without Framber? And we're seeing the Framber that we saw a couple of years ago. And man, what a relief. And you just hope he can continue that through the rest of the season in the playoffs, because you're definitely going to need it then. You don't want a time for him to flounder just when you need him. So yeah, it's really, and he's had some hard luck with the bullpen coming in and giving up some leads that he's had when he left the game. Otherwise, he'd probably have at least 2 or 3 more wins than he has right now.
No, he's not getting a ton of help a lot of times. So this Astro offense can be sort of hit and miss. Just kind of curious too, Steven, if there's anything on your mind from the past week with the Astros or just going into these last few games. What are you thinking about? as we look
Well,
forward?
I know the offense has shown some inconsistencies. I mean, you lost 2 out of 3 to the Padres, but listen, the Padres are loaded. I still feel like, Robert, that they really need to peak when the time comes, because the playoffs are, what do we have, like 15 or so games left? I'm just feeling a little uneasy about where the Astros are right now. I certainly think they will win the division. I don't think that's going to be an issue. But as far as getting deep into the playoffs, we've just got to see more consistency in the offense. And, the bullpen, I think, is going to hold its own. And then you're, of course, going to have some starters who are going to have some bullpen action once the postseason gets here. But I'm just feeling a little uneasy lately about the Astros, and I can't explain it, except that I just don't feel like they need to be where they need to be if they're going to make a really deep run in the playoffs and certainly to win a World Series.
You don't feel good that Kyle Tucker is playing more consistently, Alex Bregman's playing consistently despite the injury that we know he's dealing with, or, the Astros starting staff has been just incredible outside of Verlander, none of that stuff?
Well, it's just those little things is kind of what I'm talking about. But yeah, there are just certain things that I feel like need to click more. And I know the Astros defense has been better of late, but, there was a period where it was pretty shaky. I mean, Jeremy Pena was really struggling defensively. He seems to have pulled it together. So, yeah, I mean, I think the bats will come around when the postseason gets here, but I just feel like there's just something in the back niggling at me that I can't explain, that I just don't feel like they're quite there to have a really deep playoff run. And God, I hope I'm wrong.
Well, one thing for me, I want to see is better stuff from Ryan Presley, and I don't know if he's got it in it, and even Brian Abreu for that matter.
Yeah, Brian Abreu definitely worries me a little bit. They've certainly been hitting him a lot more this year than in previous years. Not that that's a real big surprise, Robert. I think, he was due for a regression to the mean with the 2 great years he's had the last couple of years. So, that's the other thing, though, is the bullpen, especially at the back end. I mean, I think Hader will be fine. He's had his ups and downs too, but Presley does worry me. And Abreu also, kind of bothers me too lately. So that's going to factor into it, certainly in the postseason.
Yeah, you hope that Espada takes a few more days off with Abreu and Presley. They've had so many innings the last few years. People think, oh, it's just this year you're worried about no, this has been going on for years now. And maybe some rest would do those guys. I know Abreu never does really well coming off that rest if he's been out for a while, but still, I mean, you just got to get him some rest, get their arms a little bit fresher going into the playoffs.
Well, even a day in between, that would make a difference. And, part of the problem, of course, the Astros have played 16, 17, 18 games in a row without an off day, or 25 of the last 26. So it does make it harder to do that. But as you get toward the end of the season, if you can afford it, you definitely want to take it.
It's ideal, actually, where they're at, because I don't think they're fighting for I don't think the odds of them getting up to 1 or 2 are worth, trying to get these last few. And then,
no,
I just don't feel a threat from Seattle. I mean, do you?
No, I don't. Like I said earlier, I think they will win the division. It's more a question of how deep will they go in the playoffs. I'm certainly not saying that we're going to see a collapse in the next 15 games. It's more about when they get in the postseason. Is everybody going to be as ready to go as you can be at this time of year? And no, I don't think the Astros have a threat from Seattle or anyone else. I think the division is won. Everybody else is well behind them.
Yeah. All right, let's finish off with this bit of news, and not good news either. Last week, we had our 4th major Houston Rocket passing in 2024. We've had to do tributes already for Robert Reed, Gene Peterson, and Carol Dawson. On September the 9th, old school Rockets fans like myself mourned the passing of Mitchell Wiggins. And for those too young to remember, he was a key bench player in that incredible 1986 finals run. A few years ago, we paid tribute to that great 86 team that knocked off the Magic Kareem Showtime Lakers, with the Rockets beat writer Robert Falkoff telling us all about him. And Stephen, let's go ahead and listen to what Falkoff said about Wiggins before you and I pick things back up again.
You mentioned Mitchell Wiggins earlier. Everybody knows him now as Andrew's dad, Andrew Wiggins. Is there any part of his game that you see when you watch Andrew that reminds you of Mitchell, or were they at all similar besides being kind of long and lanky guys?
just the athleticism, I think. Mitchell was a very athletic player. He didn't have the hops that Andrew has. What I remember most about Mitchell Wiggins, he was a great offensive rebounder for a two-guard. He could get inside. He was a slithery kind of player, pretty good jump shooter, but he could get inside, get offensive rebounds like nobody's business.
You mentioned the Lloyd and Wiggins suspensions for drugs. Lou Lloyd says they were set up. Did you buy into that? Have you heard him talk about that at all?
You know, there was a conference call with the league. I remember just a shock. I mean, when you think about two key guys being just taken off of your roster, you know, how do you replace that? There's no draft picks coming back to you. There's no trade pieces coming back to you. Just roster holes blown wide open that you got to try to deal with. So I don't know how it went down or what evidence there was or how it all happened. I just know that it was just a shock. And the team that year, you know, obviously is just never recovered from that kind of a blow. It's just something that they took them years to come back from.
Again, that's Rockets old school beat writer Robert Falkoff. And Stephen, I hate for Mitchell that he'll be remembered either for that drug suspension or being Andrew's dad. If it wasn't for running into that top 2 or 3 all-time Celtics team, Wiggins would have had a championship ring.
Yeah, Robert, it's always painful when you sit and talk about what if. You know, what if those suspensions had never happened? Would the Rockets have gone on to win at least one championship? And, you know, something Robert said, I remember, too, that amazed me about Mitchell Wiggins was the rebounding. I mean, you just don't see that a lot with the way he would just, what do you say, slither in? That's really what Mitchell was. He was sly, and he would just slither. I mean, you wouldn't see him, and then you saw him. He'd just snatch a rebound. He was just one of those players that you can't help but say, what if that whole thing hadn't happened? And I guess we'll never know whether they were set up or not, Robert. I mean, you know, we hear a lot of athletes say that, and most of the time we kind of brush it off as well. Everybody says that, but it's just a shame. I mean, you can't talk about devastating a team by knocking off not just one guy, but 2 guys at the same time.
3 in a year.
3 in a year. If you're talking about that too. But I mean, that's like, you know, SMU, the death penalty. I don't know if that's something you're going to see ever again, just because of how it decimated the Rockets and how many years it took them to recover. You know, as far as being Andrew's dad, well, I guess it's like Joe Jellybean Bryant being Kobe's dad. It's just, you know, sometimes the son turns out better than the dad, but I'm sure Mitchell was just as proud of Andrew and what he's accomplished as anybody else. But it is unfortunate that Mitchell has the kind of legacy that, you know, you can't talk about him without bringing up the what might have been aspect of it.
Yeah, and it wasn't just a few months suspension. It wasn't like what we saw with Ja Morant. It was 2 years for Lloyd and Wiggins. And if you don't know his background, Wiggins played for 2 colleges, finishing up at Clemson and Florida State, got drafted by the Pacers, immediately traded to the Bulls 1 year, actually, before Michael Jordan arrived. The next season, the Rockets traded Caldwell Jones for Mitchell Wiggins. Fans might forget that he came back to the Rockets briefly after the drug suspension. He finished up with the 76ers, but actually played in Europe for years, Stephen, racking up 20 years in pro basketball, which I didn't really realize until I was reading about that.
I don't think I remember that either, Robert, because it is almost like he disappeared. But, you know, now that you mention it, I remember he did have a very brief stint with the Rockets. But, of course, you know, by that point, it was moot. He certainly wasn't going to be the player that he was when he was with them initially. So,
or what I read was that, you know, he averaged 15 that year. It was like 66 games. He averaged 15 a game, but
it was for that one season, right? It was just that 1 year.
Yeah. And the Vernon Maxwell trade had something to do with the fact that he had to take lesser time, and then it was quickly the end. He goes over to the Sixers after that.
Yeah, but you just can't help but wonder, you know, could he have turned into a player that not only came off the bench, but, you know, eventually in a starting role? I mean, the way he was projected, I think he certainly could have.
Of course, a lot of NBA fans remember Andrew Wiggins missed 25 games in 2023 for personal reasons. A lot of speculation. What was going on? Well, he missed that time because of Mitchell's illness. And Stephen, Mitchell's now the 5th Rocket we've lost from the 86 team. All too young. You're talking about
Bill Fitz too, right?
Yeah. Well, you can throw in the coach, but I mean, the coach, obviously, you expect 40 years later, the coach might not be around, but Wiggins was 64. Robert Reed was 68. Steve Harris was 52. And Lou Lloyd and Granville Waiters were 60. Not sure we even mentioned this at the time. I don't remember mentioning this, but Waiters died just 3 years ago of COVID complications.
Yeah, that's pretty sobering, Robert. 5 guys out of, 15? That's about a third of your team right there.
before the age of 70, and none of these guys even
and didn't even make it to 70. Yeah, that's scary. I mean, I guess I'm dating myself here, but they're about my age, Robert, and about yours too in some cases.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's Steve Harris died. I'm older than when Steve Harris passed away at this point. So, yeah, he died super young. And, it's weird because it's like we see this sometimes in the NBA. Guys are, I guess because they're taller, maybe, I don't know, but the NBA guys seem to, especially the big guys, die younger than you would hope that, they just don't get to old age, a lot of those guys. I mean, Bill Walton, at least got into his 70s, but, some of these guys didn't even get close, like Wilt Chamberlain, and I could start naming off. There's a bunch of guys just died really young.
Well, and then there's hope, at least for guys like Kareem, who are still hanging in there, I guess. So but it seems like he's the exception almost.
Yeah, him and Bill Russell, I feel
Bill Russell, right?
Maybe the exception.
Although Russell is not doing well, from what I understand, but still, he's quite up there.
No, Russell. Yeah, we lost Russell a couple of years ago.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, he did die a couple of years ago, but he was up there.
Yeah, no, he was he's like mid 80s, I think, when he passed away.
Right.
Yeah. So, just hopefully we don't have any more of this Rockets obituaries to read in the next few months. It's been too many.
That's just very sobering indeed.
Last thing I guess I should mention is the Cougs finally got a win. They get the revenge game on Rice from last year. And again, I mentioned it last week, Stephen, sort of under the radar, their defense really looked good the first couple of weeks, and they just shut Rice down. I mean, it was just a total shit. The numbers were incredible, and that's taken away the fact that they put in like their third or fourth string, I think, towards the end of the game because they were up so big.
Yeah, and it's hard to tell whether the offense, really is getting better than it was the first week or so, but the defense, you certainly can say that about. Against Rice, I mean, they beat up on TSU something like 69-7, and then of course they turn around and lose to U of H 33-7. So, yeah, it's amazing that. I mean, it's just hard to tell, but you can't blame the defense certainly for the way it's played the first three games.
Are you a Quin Ewers guy or are you a Arch Manning guy? Which side do you go on?
Well, I mean, I think in the long term, Arch Manning, I think, is going to be great. But right now, he is going to start this week from what I saw just this afternoon, and we're recording this on Thursday.
It's good to just let him start because the team they're playing this week is not good.
Right, Louisiana Monroe. So, yeah, Arch is going to start. But, no, I think when Quin Ewers is able to come back, he's going to come back. I don't see Steve Sarkisian replacing him. Arch was spectacular, no doubt about it, but it's not against competition, the kind that Quin has faced and the kind of experience he has. My biggest worry is that every year Ewers suffers, an injury that's going to keep him out for a little bit. So, but I think in the long term, I think we're just scratching the surface of what we're going to see with Arch Manning.
Back to the Cougs. They have a winnable game this week against Cincinnati. It'd be great if you could go 2-2 and sort of get things rolling as you get into these tougher Big 12 matchups early in the season. You face the Iowa States and TCU, Kansas. That's all coming up here in the next 3 weeks.
Well, what the Cougars need is confidence, and I don't care what team it's against. A win is a win, and if you go 2-2, you look at yourself in the mirror after 4 games, you say, "Hey, we're 2-2. We got 8 games left." Sure, they've got tough Big 12 competition. They're certainly going to lose some more games, quite a few maybe, but at 2-2. You at least have the confidence to say, hey, we can give some of these teams a run for their money, maybe even grab a bowl game if we can sneak in, but at the very least, look better than they did last year. So what they need is confidence. And if they can beat a team like Cincinnati, it'll certainly be a feather in their cap for that.
Well, we'll conclude by just talking about the anniversary. It's been 11 years. If you're new to the show, if you just started listening to us, we have been doing this since the Astros were the laughing stock of Major League Baseball, since the Cougars hadn't won a NCAA tournament game in 3 decades, since James Harden, the new Rocket, just showed up. That's where we were, Stephen, when this whole thing started. And, we're in such a good place right now. And I think we should just take all the credit for this, right? We get this one. Is that right?
Well, we even have a name for it. Don't we call it the HST bump? It started back in 2013 when you got the show rolling, and that's when it began. I mean, Simone Biles, nobody knew who she was really back then when you interviewed her. Nina Kimes. I think the HST bump definitely deserves some credit for that.
And just a heads up for you Rockets fans, I have a interview lined up in a couple of weeks with Miran Fader, who's got a brand new Akeem Olajuwon biography coming out soon. So,
I can't wait for either one of that, the interview or the book. I've definitely got to get my hands on that.
Yeah, look forward to all of that stuff for you Rockets fans. But again, thank you to Stephen, done a fantastic job for me the last few years, but RG Seal and Anthony Gigo for helping me start this whole thing. And of course, Sean Bajani, and who's now, we got him right on 610 on evenings.
Sean's a star.
Every
Sean's
night.
a star, man.
Yeah, no question. And the thing is, it's just been such a hell of a ride and just having so much fun with this stuff. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate any feedback from you guys that you're enjoying this. This is a passion project. It's a labor of love. I'm not getting rich. I'm not getting much of anything. I'm losing money mostly on this whole deal. So just love you guys that always reach out and tell me good stuff. If I don't express it correctly when I reply on comments and stuff like that, just know that it doesn't go unappreciated. But looking forward to the Texans this weekend. Can't wait. Me and Tom, we're looking to break that one down. Let's get a W over the Vikings. We'll talk to you again in a few days.
You're listening to Houston Sports Talk.
Hey, don't forget to support us by subscribing and commenting on YouTube. You can always listen to us on Spotify, Apple, or your favorite podcast app. Tell your friends about us and share our show links on social media. Spread the word, everybody. Thanks for listening.